Thank you very much for the introduction, and thank you, Mr. Brown, also for paving the way for my presentation, at least partly. You have mentioned a couple of measures we also have looked into. And I would rather say we are more or less in phase 0, actually, if we would take your terminology, because our idea was how much can we integrate without having to do anything, basically. So that was the first question to answer, and then we approached also phase 1, what can be done, maybe with grid upgrades. Well, everything can be done more or less, but also with other intelligent measures. I would like to, first of all, yes, what is it about? I want to talk about. It's a study we have done here in the last 12 months, basically, where we looked into 2 regions in New Delhi, where BSE is. Is somebody from BSE is here? I've seen them yesterday. I think they want to come back tomorrow, but today not. And also the distribution company from BHOPAL. Is there anybody there? Okay, so anyways, thanks a lot to them for providing the data, and thank you also to GIZ for the valuable contribution and support on this study. So, first of all, I think all of you know that there's a target of 40 gigawatts to be achieved by 2022 with regard to rooftop PV. So that's basically what we wanted to look into. And what we did is we looked in, already mentioned the 2 regions, Bhopal and Delhi, where we selected a couple of grids, rural and urban grids of different topologies, put them in Dixon Power Factory, the simulation tool, and did some simulation on this to see, A, phase 0, how much can be integrated without doing anything, and B, if we want to integrate more, what do we have to do, what impact do we have there. So here you can see a small overview of the 5 feeders we looked into, our distribution grids we looked into. They were supplied here in urban feeder of Delhi from the 33 kV level, mainly cables. We looked into also the low voltage system here, talking about lengths of 3 kilometers and the peak load of 2.5 megawatts. We looked into 2 different rural feeders of Delhi, where it was mainly then overhead lines, stock type, looking at lengths of up to 20 kilometers. Overall installed distribution transformer capacity is 5.2 MVA. The second one is quite similar. And then we had one in Bhopal, where we had typically overhead lines in the urban area also with rabbit, and a rural area was with raccoon. So 11 kilometers was not as far. So these were the 5 different feeders, distribution systems we looked into to see what impact actually we do see if we integrate, if we enhance the rooftop PV capacity. So building this up, and how far can we actually get? We looked into different scenarios. Maybe first of all, some differences between these 2. We found that it's quite important to look, especially been mentioning earlier, voltage is a major issue besides overloading of assets. That the last instance of voltage control in Bhopal area was like from the 132 to 33 kV, whereas in Delhi it was at least currently starting from the 33 to 11 kV level. On-load tap changing is possible. Actually, it is not all of it is automatic, but partly done manual. So that's also important to notice. For Delhi, we also received low voltage data that was quite difficult to get. That's why we decided only to look into one grid itself, a low voltage grid. That's what we did in Delhi. Data from the 11 kV level and 33 kV level was provided from all discoms, and was very plausible and pretty good to use. So we were quite satisfied on that. We didn't have to do too many assumptions. Some assumptions still we had to go for. So the scenarios we looked into, I just wanted to show 2 to you. Is one, the first assumption or approach that we assume that the PV is actually distributed evenly in the in the system. So in the 11 kV system, you can see it here. So we have rated it basically to the distribution transformer capacity. So that's also quite important to note, because if we talk about penetration rate, then it's really important to mention what are you actually rating it to. And we said A, it is the inverter capacity of the PV system. So it's not, in Germany, it's quite common to take the PV peak capacity, so the DC side. We took the AC side because that's more common in India, I have learned during the last couple of weeks and months. A, and secondly, it is then rated to the distribution transformer size. So if I jump back some slides, it's not on here. Just telling you that the typical size in urban area is 630 kVA. So if we talk about 100% PV penetration, then we would talk about 630 kW PV. And on the rural side, we have typically 100 kVA transformers. So when we talk about 100%, we talk about 100 kW photovoltaic there. The second scenario, we said, okay, is this realistic, to have a really even distribution? And as we know that this is unrealistic, we said, okay, we need to go into some kind of worst case scenario, and this is given if we put the PV power to the end of the feeder. Why? Because then the voltage drop along the line will be higher, A, and B, if the lines, and that's what we also observed in the system, are actually towards the end of the feeder, have a smaller cross-section, so the capacity is lower, then it tends to overload earlier. So that's the second scenario I wanted to show to you, where we said, okay, we take the same amount of PV for comparison reasons, and then we just don't distribute it evenly, but we add it, or we put it to the end of the feeder. Whoop. And then we looked into, also with scenarios, we looked into the we looked into the load itself, the load characteristics. So how will this develop in the next couple of years? So we talked to the discoms, and they said, well, we do expect like 5% increase per year, and this will mainly be due to air conditions. So that's one assumption we've made. And you can actually see the load as it is today here in red, where we have the typical midday peak, which is quite nice for photovoltaic because then also the sun is shining. However, we also have the issue of like late evening peaks you can see here. And assuming that air conditioning is coming more and more into play, we have taken this curve up here, sine wave, which is based on studies which have been done in the US, California, as far as I remember, where they have actually evaluated, okay, when does the air conditioner actually run? So we put this on top, and then you can find this like bluish characteristic, which is not at all in favor of solar in terms of correlation. So it doesn't really have so the highest peak is somewhere after 6 o'clock when the sun has set. So it doesn't really help for solar, at least not at this point. We looked at different technology options. Now, don't be afraid. There they are. So a huge table, basically. Partly they have been mentioned also by Professor Brown. The first thing is no solution, base case, we call it. That was kind of phase 0. If we don't do anything, how far can we go? And then we looked into various technologies which actually help for voltage control. So on-node tap changing with automatic voltage regulation, the medium voltage level, wide area control, quite common in Germany as well, where you sense in the system itself and see what is the voltage out there, and then accordingly the tap changer of the transformer is then set. Then we have recognized a couple of shunt compensators in the system already, and the question was, okay, can we make use of them? Do they help if we control them maybe in a different way in favor of integrating more photovoltaic? Quite common also, I think, mentioned are possibilities to use reactive power. So we looked into a fixed power factor to be set in order to, like if the PV system is feeding in, then by consuming reactive power, pull the voltage and down to a certain, or more advanced using a QV characteristic. So depending on the voltage itself, then only make use of reactive power. We also looked into like the distribution transformer, also a thing which is done like in Germany very often. So there are like, especially in the north of Germany, there's a distribution system operator who has decided to exchange every single distribution transformer with an unload tap changing capable transformer. That's very expensive, but it helps. It does not only help for integrating photovoltaic, but also for integrating, so decoupling the medium voltage from the low voltage. However, it's a very expensive solution, and therefore it's very questionable. If you talk to others, like in our region, in Hesse, down in Hesse, they say, oh, don't go away with this stuff. We don't need that, you know. So anyways, we put it in our scenarios to be looked at in our study. And now we're coming to some other measures which are basically, I think I've got some animation on that as well. So this was wide area control. I just have some selected ones where we sense into the system. Let me see, I've just selected a couple of them. This is the power factor basically, which is like depending on the active power. So this is the power factor, and here is the power output. Yes, coming into the solutions we looked into with regard to active power. It was also mentioned earlier, we need some controllability, so how can this be done? And it was also mentioned that we have a few PV systems which are actually then capped on 70% in Germany. Also mentioned if you add a storage, for example, then you're not allowed to go more than 50% out. So we picked these solutions as well and looked into this. What impact does it have? How much more PV can we integrate if we do so? And what is the impact also on the energy curtailment we have if we do so? One solution, of course, just want to finish off this this table, is reinforcement of lines and cables of the transformers. Basically, a solution which is always possible, but of course also expensive. And we looked into the storage battery in two different types. One is like for own consumption, where typically it doesn't really help with regard to the midday peak, which will be fed in. Unfortunately, you have skipped this slide, so but I assume that this can be seen in other presentations also. I haven't prepared this, unfortunately, because I've limited time. And then we also looked into peak shaving of battery, which is, of course, from a system operator, much more beneficial, like not to feed during midday into the system. And we also looked in demand-side management. Okay, let's have a look at the simulations and the results. So here are the different steps we have taken, like 20% penetration, 50, 75, 100%, 150%. So we've chosen 20, and BHOPAL was 30%, 50%, because these are values which are already today common in the regulation not to feed in more or not to connect more than these like 20% or 50% ratio. And we wanted to challenge this and to see where we are there. Then we did a couple of simulations along a day. So we have analyzed quite a number of data, of PV production data, of load data. We've combined these, so we've taken a very low-loaded day and a high in-feed day from PV perspective, put them together, and then we did some calculation based on these various penetration rates. And we looked into loading, that's what you can see up here, and we looked into voltage, and then we set a certain voltage limits, like 1.1 per unit, or 100% loading, and shouldn't go above that. So how much penetration can we have before actually reaching these limits? That was our question. So here you can see now simulation results. This is the urban feeder in Delhi shown. It's quite simple, so that's why I'm also showing it here. So it's quite easy to understand, where you have the distribution transformers here, there, and there. There's another grid below, which is not shown here, but it is included in the results. And you can see the loading on the right. It's green, everything is fine, low loaded. With a 20% penetration rate, and thank you, and the voltage on the left, which is quite flat. So if we start now to increase the voltage, the penetration, so we are now in 50%, you can see that it starts to get a higher loading, and then finally at 100%, we're almost at 100% distribution transformer loading. Okay, that's quite understandable. And then finally, like 150%, we do A, have a too high voltage, so this is surpassing here, and B, all the transformers are basically overloaded. So that's these calculations we did, and then we got these nice diagrams. Okay, they are also very powerful, and don't be afraid of those. what you only have to look at is the black line first. The black line is phase 0, so we are having a penetration rate of 80, which is mainly due to the consumption. And then we go up with higher penetration rates. So we go up with the penetration rates here, and we end up at, for example, well, we cross the line here at somewhere around 80%. So there we reach the thermal limit, and therefore we can say, okay, we cannot go further. That's our phase 0. After that, we now have to go into phase 1. And we did this for like the different situations. So here, for example, we reach when we have very high penetration at the end of the feeder at 75%, so we get an overloading of a cable basically. And now what else you can see here is on the bottom, it's actually the voltage. You have the different measures, the solutions we can offer. And all the solutions which are on this side, they're not really helping because they hit the limit already earlier. And these are basically, in this case, specific case, reactive power, which is now introduced into the system and therefore loading the system higher. So we don't have a voltage issue here, but using reactive power would worsen the situation. So here it's only helpful to use active power measures, so capping or using batteries, for example. That's the solutions we do see. Looking at BHOPAL, this was a pretty strong grid, so we are above 100% when reaching the limit. And like looking at daily rural, we do achieve like a voltage issue here. There we get a voltage issue. So this time we can actually extend, for example, the limit by using reactive power measures like up to 100% are possible by using, for example, QU characteristic or QV. And for another BHOPAL rural result, we can see again 100% are possible. So here is now the overview. We have done a couple of these tables. This is just one of them where you can actually see the different scenarios for Delhi and BHOPAL and the different measures to be taken. And we do see that mainly like in the rural area of Delhi, we do get improvement if you use like voltage measures like wide area control, QU characteristic, but in all cases, of course, capping PV, so not allowing for the peaks to come into the system, using storage to get rid of the peaks is beneficial. So, coming to my conclusions and recommendations. Conclusions. What we have found is grids in India are not very different from other grids in the world. We looked at various grids, Brazil, California, don't know, lots of them. Australia, exactly. What you can see is that up to 75% of the transformer rating, we usually have no issues at all with integrating. So phase 0 kind of up to 75%. And in many, many cases, actually 100% are no problem are possible. So what we have seen above 75%, if we go above 75% in rural networks, we get overvoltage issues. So this can be solved by using reactive power, for example, or wide area control. And in urban networks, typically, we have rather loading issues where we need to go into peak shaving batteries or like PV capping. Recommendations. We do recommend that automatic voltage control is implemented for the 132 to 33 kV transformers, which is currently the on-load tap changing is applied, but it's done manually. So these should be automatic. It would even be beneficial, but not strictly required to have this also true for the power transformer 6611 to 3311. Under and overvoltage issues can be efficiently eliminated using wide area control. It's not that expensive. And we do need, and that's also what Professor Brown said, we do need remote controllability of PV inverters. That's the last point, actually active power controllability from all PV units, but there is also a good solution. Like if you talk about rooftop, really small system, then rather go for something like 70 or 75% of the output. And we measured that this is would only lead to a yearly energy loss of roughly 3%. This was really surprising because this is a value which is related to the the AC value of the inverter. Yeah? So in terms of like German, we would talk about 50% of the PV peak can actually be curtailed, and you will only lose like 3%. This was really surprising to me, and therefore I believe this is a pretty good option. Besides, of course, then also using batteries. Why? Because we have so many UPS out there already, and we can use these batteries also for then capping the night peak, so from a load perspective. So I come to my end. I think that was pretty good on time. You can actually download the report on this webpage. I'm not reading it out. You can have also a copy of the short, so I've put a picture up there. I've put them all at our booth outside, so there's a display. If you are interested, we have a couple of copies. You can see me there after this presentation and collect one. It's only a limited number, so who comes first is served first. But as maybe GIZ also has some more copies, and anyways, the electronic version is also available on the internet. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Schwester. Again, we will answer the questions at the end of the session, but just a quick session from my side. Did you investigated the financial side of the single solutions?
Partly. We did some investigation on these, yes, but it's quite difficult for India. So we have like lots of data for Germany, for sure, okay. And we put some figures also in the report with regard to these, but we're not very sure how transferable this is. So it's more like a qualitative judgment on this, yeah? So where to say, okay, here you see a certain like price, which is all cheaper solution compared to others, like reactive power control, for example. I'm talking about that. Yeah?
Okay, thank you.